Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
In towns and cities throughout the North stand statues of solitary Civil War soldiers. These silent sentinels occupy town halls, city parks, and cemeteries. They watch over their communities, and Rochester is no exception. Rochester's solitary soldier stands guard in the Rochester Common. The front plaque on the statue reads, "In commemoration of the valor and patriotism of the volunteers of Rochester who in the War of 1861 gave their lives for the maintenance of the Union." It was erected in 1885, and the monument bears the names of the 54 men from Rochester who died in the Civil War. Here are some of the stories from these 54 names.
Charles Hussey was born in Rochester in 1844 and mustered into the Army in August of 1862. At the Battle of Spotsylvania, he was wounded in the hip and captured by Confederate forces on May 12, 1864. He died of his wounds while languishing in a prison camp. Edward Caney lived in Rochester, working as a carpenter. He joined the Army in 1861 and was killed in the Second Battle of Bull Run on August 29, 1862. He was 45 years old and left a wife and 5 children. To the left of Edward's name is his son, Charles Caney. Charles was 19 years old when he was killed in the Battle of Cold Harbor on June 3, 1864. James Smith was born in Rochester in June of 1823. He was killed on July 2, 1863, at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was married and left behind 5 children.
During the late 1800s and early 1900s, local Civil War veterans would visit the monument to pay their respects to their fallen comrades. However, these visits ceased in the 1930s when Rochester's last Civil War veteran passed away. What some do not know is that the current monument was not the first Civil War monument on the Rochester Common. It is actually the second monument. In 1871, 6 years after the Civil War ended, Rochester citizens are calling for a memorial to honor their soldiers. After a few months of inquiring into monuments in other communities, Rochester agreed upon a monument that was simply a tall granite shaft. It would include the names of the 54 Rochester men who died in the war, and the location would be the Rochester Common.
On September 5, 1872, the town unveiled their new Civil War monument. It was 23.5 feet high, and when it stood on its foundation, it was over 25 feet high. The September 13, 1872 Rochester Courier described the unveiling ceremony as a major event in the city. Hundreds of Civil War veterans from surrounding towns attended the ceremony, and among the veterans was distinguished Civil War General Simon Goodall Griffin from Keene, New Hampshire. The general was the main speaker.
Here are a couple of pictures showing local children dressed in costume with American flags that attended the dedication ceremony. Several bands were in attendance, playing patriotic music, and religious leaders led everyone in public prayers. The only image that can be found of the original monument is from this 1877 map. As you can see, it's just a simple granite shaft, and when the newness of this monument wore off, it was found wanting. Other towns' monuments included a statue of a soldier and looked much nicer. By 1884, Rochester did not want the plain-looking monument anymore and voted to replace it with a new one that included a statue of a soldier. On May 30th, 1885, the town of Rochester had a rededication ceremony and introduced their second Civil War monument, which is now the town's current monument. The June 5th, 1885 Rochester Courier reported that over 5,000 people showed up for the event. One of the main speakers was Rochester resident Silas Hussey. He was a master stonecutter and helped place the new statue on its foundation. The statue of the soldier is 7 feet 3 inches tall, but it's not unique. There is a duplicate of our Civil War statue used in Philadelphia. Selling Civil War statues was a big business in the late 1800s. Here is a page from an 1882 monument sales catalog, and one of the items for sale is a statue that is very similar to the one in Rochester. The federal government also provided 4 Civil War cannons to be placed around the monument. Ironically, in 1942, the cannons would be sent off to war again, as they were donated to a World War II scrap drive. After all these years, the statue still stands, reminding us of the sacrifice made by the men of Rochester in the American Civil War.
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.